You may remember that all living things share similar chemicals. These chemicals are carbon-based molecules. Carbon-based molecules may also be called macromolecules or biomolecules. Don't be confused, all living things are made up of the same 4 molecules. So what are these molecules? There are 4 basic types of macromolecules. This includes lipids, proteins, carbohydrates, and nucleic acids. At the end of this section, you should be able to recall the names of each macromolecule and the elements that they are made of, as well as identify their structures and functions and name some food sources that may contain them. We'll first talk about carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. The macromolecules all contain similar elements. A silly way we're going to remember these elements are to remember CHO, CHO, CHON, and CHOMP. Carbohydrates represent the first CHO in this memorization. Since lipids are also made of these elements, it's important to note that these elements are always in a 1:2 to 1 ratio in carbohydrates. For example, glucose is C6H12O6. For every carbon atom, there are 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom. This ratio is constant for all carbohydrates. The structure of macromolecules are identifiable by their monomers. Monomers are the building blocks of polymers. Think of them as individual Legos. Polymers are just a bunch of monomers linked together. Think of them as stacks of Legos. The monomer of a carbohydrate is a simple sugar, also called a monosaccharide. Some examples of simple sugars are glucose and fructose. You can identify a sugar by the -ose suffix, or the ose that's on the end of the word. The polymer of carbohydrate is a complex molecule called a polysaccharide. Examples of polysaccharides include starch, cellulose, and glycogen. The function of carbohydrates is to provide immediate energy for living things. This is why athletes sometimes carb load before a race or a big game. This is also why you need to eat a good breakfast, like cereal, before starting your day. Foods that contain simple sugars are things that you think of as sweet, like candy and fruit. Also, other food items like vegetables and milk. They are quickly digested and can provide a short burst of energy. Foods that contain complex carbs like bread and corn. Complex carbs tend to take longer to digest, and they can provide energy longer than just sugar. As I mentioned earlier, lipids are also made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. This is where the other CHO comes from. However, there is no specific ratio, and there are usually only a few oxygen atoms. The monomers of lipids include fatty acids and cholesterol. There is no specific polymer, so we just identify the polymer as a lipid. Examples are fats like triglycerides and phospholipids, which make up the boundaries of cells. Lipids have a few functions. The most important is long-term energy storage for living things. This is why we can gain weight when we aren't using the energy-containing carbohydrates that we consume. Lipids also make up the cell membrane, providing structure and the boundary for the cell. Another function of lipids is to provide insulation for living things. Think of seals and polar bears that have layers of blubber to keep them warm in cold Arctic climates. Foods that you typically think of as fatty are foods that contain lipids. Things like fish, oil, and nuts are great sources of lipids. Proteins are composed of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen as well, but they also have nitrogen. This is where that CHON comes from in our phrase CHO, CHO, CHON, CHOMP. Monomers of proteins are called amino acids. There are 20 different kinds of amino acids, and we will learn about them later when we learn about protein synthesis. Amino acids link together to form polypeptides, and proteins can be made of one or more polypeptides. Like many other things you will encounter when studying biology, the structure or shape of a protein is going to determine its function. Proteins have the most varied function of the macromolecules. Your cells can make them in order to build and repair body tissues, like muscles. They're also involved in every chemical reaction that happens in your body as enzymes. You can see an example of an enzyme illustration here at the bottom of the screen. Proteins have the most varied function of the macromolecules. Foods that are rich in protein are meat, eggs, and soy. Nucleic acids are made of carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, and phosphorus. They're the CHON in our phrase, cho, cho, chon, chonk. Monomers of nucleic acids are called nucleotides. This is an easy one to remember because they have the same prefix. We'll learn about the parts of nucleotide later in the semester as well. Polymers of a nucleotide are just known as nucleic acids, and some of the best examples are DNA and RNA. The Na in these molecules stands for nucleic acid. The function of a nucleic acid is to store and carry genetic information. This information is passed on from parents to offspring during reproduction. Nucleic acids are found in almost all foods because they are present in all cells. All living things are made up of DNA, and when you think about it, most of the things that you consume were either living or once living. When you eat a food item, your body breaks down the nucleic acids and uses them as monomers to build your own DNA. You'll find more nucleic acids in foods that are unrefined and unprocessed. So that Happy Meal from McDonald's most likely does not have as many nucleic acids as a healthy salmon with a side of fish. This wraps up our notes on biomolecules. You'll want to make sure you have your entire chart filled in to be able to complete all the questions and assignments that you have throughout this level.